Bruno, this is around latent and patent defects when it comes to the purchase of an immovable property, so a house. This purchaser in this particular instance discovered that there was water damage after signing the OTP, but before transfer of the property actually occurred. The purchaser says that the current owner purposefully hid the water damage. When they went to go view the property, he directed them to certain areas and excluded other areas. The purchaser also indicates that they had noticed that there was some water damage on the property and then signed a declaration which said that they would undertake to repair this. Sorry, I have a plane flying over me now. That they would undertake to repair this damage. However, when they went through with a contractor to look at the damage that that they agreed to repair, the contractor discovered there were other areas along the house which also had water damage. And the purchaser now is saying, look, I'm not prepared to repair that damage as well. The current owner must repair that water damage. So Bruno, around latent and patent defects, what kind of advice do we have for the viewer in this particular case?
Sure. Cool. Thanks so much, Chris. So we've had this discussion a couple of times. So maybe just to set the groundwork so everyone understands where I'm coming from. If you have sets of circumstances that apply with the CPA in place and sets of circumstances that don't involve the CPA. The CPA being the Consumer Protection Act, right? Now, as everyone knows, Consumer Protection Act was designed in order to assist the consumers and protect their rights, especially against unscrupulous suppliers, right? So if you notice Supply and Consumer Protection Act doesn't apply, then the normal law outside of the CPA would actually would actually govern the relationship. So that's the first thing that we need to be aware of. And so just in this question alone, we have to be able to answer it in two ways. So let's for a second say the easy answer is if the CPA does apply, right? Now, if the CPA does apply, the CPA has a whole list of requirements and provisions and remedies in the event of a property being sold in the course of one's business. So this would have to be a supplier, which you sometimes find property investors that flip a lot, property developers, that sort of thing, would be selling it in their supply. And doing something like this would be an example of where the CPA would kick in. You'd probably be able to lay a complaint and actually take it to the tribunal. Why that is all the products being sold in terms of the CPA do have a warranty against defects and do need to be utilized in the way that they were supposed to be utilized and for the purpose that, so it's almost like fit for purpose, right? So the CPA makes provision for that. So an example of this that I typically use is if you're driving a Mercedes-Benz, right? And it's making a terribly loud noise, and you're driving it and it's making a noise, and now it's nothing wrong with the car works fine, but it's just, it makes a really, really loud noise. There were actual examples of cases where the courts looked at the situation and said, look, fit for the purpose. If a person just wanted to get from A to B, right, they could drive any car. You don't buy a Mercedes just to get from A to B. You buy it for comfort and luxury. So so fit for purpose here would be different from a person that literally just buys the car, and provided that it gets to B, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter what sound it makes as long as it makes the journey. So it's the same thing in situations like this. So we're looking at suppliers, whether the person's a supplier or not, and the reason why you're buying a property. Now, properties are easy because properties need to be utilized typically to live in, right? So the fit for purpose tick is already there. The warranty against defects, that's also a big one. Things like damp damage are quite serious in material. So it's not something immaterial like a little scratch on the wall or a little small amount of paint that might have cracked off, from the plastering. It is quite material because it takes a lot of work, and sometimes you need to remove the plaster, waterproof again. It's a mission. So the materiality also plays a part. So we're looking at the relationships outside of the CPA. Now, in this particular instance, a purchase within the CPA. So now, if the CPA applies, the only way you can get, here's the third thing, the only way you can include these defects in the sale is if you actually expressly make the purchaser aware of this. Now, that's why you find in sales and execution, for example, where everyone is aware that you're buying this property and the sheriff has no clue what this property looks like. You're buying it warts and all, right? But it needs to be quite express. So with the sheriff, it's quite express that he doesn't have a clue. You're just buying in. If you're buying from a seller that actually knows the property, he can't just hide behind a voetstoots clause, right? He would need to get you to sign up saying, listen, you see these defects, you see that there's water damage, you're going to repair this. And this is what the seller did in this instance. But the seller didn't go to the right extent. And by that, I mean, they didn't actually consider the extent of the damage. So, here I feel that if the CPA does apply to the relationship, the purchaser would have recourse because the seller didn't make the extent known. So it's not express enough just to say, listen, you repair the water damage or damp damage isn't enough if the purchaser didn't realize that, this damage occurred all through the house. So from a CPA perspective, I do feel that if the extent was omitted and wasn't expressly agreed to, that the CPA would kick in and that this would be one of the defects that CPA would cater for. If the CPA doesn't apply, we look back at old rules, right? Old rules speak of latent defects, patent defects, and typically these were governed or centered around voetstoots clauses, right? And you'll find them in contracts nowadays. Now, voetstoots does still apply. It's not that the CPA has made it non-applicable. The CPA simply said, if you're a supplier, it won't apply. But in private relationships, it does apply. So if the seller sold the property voetstoots, then you know what? It doesn't matter. He basically gave it to you as is, and you bought it as is, with the exclusion that if there was an intentional omission or in any way the seller intentionally did not disclose that defect to you, this speaks of fraud. And in these instances, the protection of voetstoots would not be extended to the seller. Now, the difficulty is you're saying, the viewer's saying, he did it intentionally. Now, to prove intention is a different story. So we need to look at it and say, well, why are we saying intentionally? It depends on the nature of the damage. If a person lives on a property, walks around it all the time, and it's something that they're aware of, they've seen, then as far as I'm concerned, it's quite patent. And a person not acting like they don't know about it is intentional, because it sounds like they're intentionally hiding. But I have seen some cases where the sellers don't have a clue. They had no idea that there was something wrong with the property. Some damages, for example, are latent. And genuinely, the seller didn't know. And by latent, we mean things that are hidden, as opposed to patent, which are quite, anyone would be able to see them. So from this viewer's perspective, if you can prove intention, you've got recourse. If there's a voetstoots clause and you can't prove intention, you may struggle.